Then he writes, this fellow was entirely black from head to foot. A clear proof that what he said was stupid. So Kant is a racist. But that doesn't necessarily mean that anything he said was more or less true. And it doesn't mean that his framework is racist as well. And it also doesn't follow that we should make a moral judgment outwardly against his work as a whole because of his racism. People often ask the question if we could separate the work from the philosopher, and if we can, then should we? But the word separate is problematic because it smuggles in the idea that there's a marriage between the philosopher and his work that bears concretely on the truth of his work. Some concepts get invested with meaning rather than just having meaning. And the clearest example to me of this point is the use of the N-word. At one point in history, the N-word was a derogatory slur to refer to foundational Black Americans. As time progressed, foundational Black Americans took the term and made the term a cultural signifier, a term of endearance, and a way to acknowledge a shared history, as it were. This argument comes from philosopher David Theo Goldberg. So one way for us to test whether a philosophical view is malleable or not is to think about the structure versus the variables. When a structure is constant, even if the variables change, that shows us that a philosophical view is malleable. So in the case of conservatism, we want to conserve what has been inherited. And so the variable is the investment, which is what counts as inheritance. So Burke is going to invest it with institutions, customs, and little platoons, whereas American populist conservatism invested with the free market. So the structure is the same, but the content is different. Free markets versus institutions. So if we run that same test on Mein Kampf, where we evaluate the structure as a constant and see how the variables play, we can see that the structure doesn't survive, and neither does the variable if you try to take the racism away, because the subject of Mein Kampf is racist. There's no historical context wherein Mein Kampf isn't racist, so it can never be used as an anti-racist framework. Then there are people like Ray Terada who argue that thinkers like Kant and Hegel are anti-black on the ground that their projects are racialist, meaning they make their sets of norms and values and political institutions the standard for what a good political institution or norm or person at large even is. So they use themselves to define the other and judge whether that person is civilized. And that in itself is anti-black because the black person is necessarily distinct from the white one. Yet Terada's argument commits a category error, meaning frameworks aren't necessarily racist. It's the content within the framework that's racist. She misplaces consciousness because she makes the framework something that can be racist or enact racism, which I find to be problematic, because if the framework is conscious, then the subject using the framework doesn't have the same level of agency. They're being controlled by the framework to be racist, which I think is incorrect. For example, Hegel uses different terminology to refer to different things at different times. So when he was talking about slavery or bondage in the master-slave dialectic, he used the German word Knecht. But then when he was talking about chattel slavery elsewhere, he used a totally different term, Sklaverei. And Terada needs Hegel to mean Sklaverei or chattel slavery in the master-slave dialectic, but he actually just didn't mean chattel slavery in the master-slave dialectic. She says it includes racial chattel slavery, and it must do so. Inclusion of the racial slave in the dialectic is a premise Terada's reading requires, but it's not a conclusion it establishes. Terada's structural claim is unsupported by Hegel's text. If a concept is malleable, any particular meaning an author gives it is only one investment among possible others. Hegel's anti-black use of those concepts is one investment among possible others. If a use is only one investment among possible others, it is not structural because the framework doesn't depend on it. Therefore, Hegel's anti-blackness is not structural. If an anti-black investment is not structural, then nothing prevents a neo-Hegelian from reinvesting those concepts against the colonial meanings that Hegel actually gave them. A neo-Hegelian may legitimately reinvest Hegel's concepts against Hegel's own anti-black meanings. Now, Kant's racial taxonomy is of the different human races from 1775 and on the use of teleological principles in philosophy from 1788. And this work is a posteriori, meaning it's empirical. It's built out of travel reports and secondhand accounts. But Kant never traveled. He spent his entire career in Königsberg. So if the evidence is empirical, yet he never traveled outside of his place of work where he could actually interact with the other races, then he actually doesn't have any evidence at all for his racism. In the preface of Academy, Kant argues that he wants a pure moral philosophy which is fully cleansed of everything that might be in any way empirical and belong to anthropology. He also says that the ground of obligation here is to be sought not in the nature of the human being or the circumstances of the world in which he is placed, but a priori solely in concepts of pure reason. He also says all moral philosophy rests entirely on its pure part, and when applied to the human being, it borrows not the least bit from knowledge about him or anthropology, but it gives him, as a rational being, laws a priori. And on who it covers, Kant says, you ought not to lie is valid not merely for human beings, as though other rational beings did not have to heed it. And when we look at Kant in the classroom, he lectured on physical geography 49 times. That's every summer semester, from 1756 to 1796. And he also lectured on anthropology 24 times. And this was from every winter semester, 1772 to 1796. And for scale, he taught logic 56 times, metaphysics 53 times. And so anthropology was not something that Kant found to be a hobby. So now we have a picture of a man who, by his own words, borrows not the least bit from anthropology, who only taught 24 courses in anthropology. And the thing everybody quotes actually gets told wrong. It's actually not Kant meeting a black man. Kant is actually relaying a report from Father Labat. Labat had reproached a black carpenter over how he treated his wives. The carpenter told him, "You whites are fools, because first you concede your wives so much, and then you complain when they drive you mad." And Kant says there might be something in this deserving a reflection. Then he writes, "This fellow was entirely black from head to foot, a clear proof that what he said was stupid." And the real version is actually worse than what people typically paraphrase, because he simply just took somebody else's account of the whole of who someone was and reduced their personhood down to the color of their skin, and adduced that because of the color of that person's skin, that person was stupid. In 1788, the same year as the Critique of Practical Reason, Kant published an essay saying that Africans and Indians lack a drive to activity. Native Americans are incapable of any culture, and sit lowest in his hierarchy. And there's a footnote in which he endorses a pro-slavery text approving an attack on the proposal to free black slaves on the ground that they will never work unless they are coerced. 10 years later, in the Metaphysics of Morals from 1797, he had a reversal. He argued for full juridical status for non-whites. He argued for colonial conquest to be prohibited. He also argued for European settlement to require contractual consent from the people already living in those places. And he said that the civilizing mission defense needs to be rejected. And chattel slavery, in Kleingeld's words, was categorically and repeatedly. Now, he dropped the racism, but his framework still stood. His structure still remained. Kleingeld's conclusion was that during the 1780s, as he wrote the Groundwork and the Critique of Practical Reason, his views on race contradicted his own moral universalism, and that he finally resolved his contradiction in the mid-1790s. And so we can understand from the Hegel perspective that a person's framework does not necessarily have to have a racist intent, because in the case of Kant, his framework turned out to be malleable even for himself, where he was racist, but his framework was not. And one could argue that he dropped the hierarchy, and he didn't necessarily drop race as a biological category. And that's fair. His views on women also never underwent any type of revision, and that's fair as well. He never says when he changed his mind, and he never says why, and that's fair as well. And there's no retraction there. There's no confession or anything like that. And it's contested. Robert Bernasconi holds that Kant failed to speak out against chattel slavery. Kleingeld says those statements do actually exist, and she cites them. And so the scholars fight about this. And of course I could just take the win. I've shown that Kant's framework is malleable in terms of investment, because his framework was sustained and even corrective when it came to the investment of racism. And in fact, I can even argue that his framework didn't really have a space for his racism, and Kant was clear about that. But I do think it's important that we have an honest discourse around the opinion of scholars about it. It's not concrete one way or another. And so this is also reflective of our investment. Where do we want to focus? Do we want to focus on the man, or do we want to focus on the framework? And yeah, we absolutely should separate Kant from his racism. And it's not that it doesn't matter that Kant was a racist. It's more like, okay, Kant was a racist, but his framework precisely corrected him out of his racism. His personal opinions were void of his truth that we can hear in his work. So people want to know if we can separate the philosopher from their racism, and if we should separate the philosopher from their racism. And I say, indict the man, but keep the work separate from the man, because what that allows us to do is participate in the shared project of truth, knowing that it's made by imperfect hands and shaped by many racists and many bigots and all the things, but it doesn't necessarily make the truth less true. Then what we can understand is that the truth is life. It doesn't matter what your life was a symbol of or what your opinions were. It matters the value in the truth that you share in a political project. Many people who defend Kant's racism defend it on the grounds that he's a man of his time. I think the strongest version of this argument is Hannah Arendt's argument from Origins of Totalitarianism that explains racial thinking is different from racism. This is a whole different conversation. I'm not going to get into it here, but I think Hannah Arendt has the strongest argument in that regard. Now, Hegel and Kant get credit for the machinery, they get credit for the framework, but they don't necessarily get credit for the conclusion. The conclusion is credited to the shared project of philosophy, the community subject to certain social norms, the discourse around the work, the people who find the truth and find the meaning in the framework and apply it. And so the next time you find out a thinker you use or read or quote says something racist, then you should remember that who he is not his work. His work is what makes him free, and his work is a participation in the project of shared truth, but his opinions don't necessarily bear on the work unless they do. You need to test the malleability of the framework and see if it hinges on racism. If it doesn't hinge on racism, then the terms are malleable and you can use them, you can invest in them how you want. If you like this type of content, you should probably watch my video on France Fanon, If Black Liberation Happens, Blackness Disappears.